For years, Ethan had treated his wife's family like his own. He never saw himself as an outsider who had married into the family. He saw them as people he loved and respected. Whenever someone needed help, Ethan was usually the first person to show up. He helped his father-in-law repair the family store after a storm damaged part of the roof. He spent weekends helping relatives move into new homes. When family members faced financial difficulties, he quietly offered assistance without expecting recognition or repayment. Because of his reliability, everyone trusted him, especially when it came to managing the financial records of the small family business that several relatives depended on for income. Ethan took that responsibility seriously. Every transaction was documented, every invoice was organized, and every account was carefully reviewed. He believed transparency protected everyone involved. That was why he immediately noticed when the numbers stopped making sense. At first, the discrepancies were small, amounts that could easily be explained as bookkeeping mistakes, but as the weeks passed, the missing money became harder to ignore. Payments were disappearing, transfers appeared without proper authorization, and account balances no longer matched official records. Ethan spent long evenings reviewing statements and comparing transactions, hoping to find a simple explanation. Instead, the evidence led him to a conclusion he never wanted to accept. The person responsible appeared to be Derek, his brother-in-law. Ethan stared at the records for hours, unable to believe what he was seeing. Derek was popular within the family. He was confident, charming, and always knew how to make people laugh. Family gatherings often revolved around him. The idea that he could be stealing from the very people who trusted him seemed impossible. Yet the financial trail pointed directly toward him. Hoping there was some misunderstanding, Ethan arranged a private meeting. He brought copies of the records and calmly explained what he had found. Rather than showing concern or surprise, Derek leaned back in his chair and laughed. He dismissed the evidence as harmless accounting adjustments and told Ethan to stop acting like a detective. The casual way Derek responded unsettled Ethan even more than the missing money itself. Instead of offering explanations, Derek seemed completely unconcerned. When Ethan pressed for answers, Derek's expression hardened. He warned Ethan not to create problems that would divide the family. The conversation ended without resolution, leaving Ethan deeply troubled. Over the following weeks, Ethan continued investigating. The more records he reviewed, the clearer the pattern became. Thousands of dollars had been moved into accounts connected to Derek. This was no accounting error, it was deliberate theft. Ethan found himself trapped in an impossible situation. Reporting the crime would almost certainly create conflict within the family. Remaining silent would make him complicit in wrongdoing. He spent countless sleepless nights wrestling with the decision. He discussed the situation with his wife, Yarn, who was shocked and heartbroken. Neither of them wanted to believe that a close family member could betray everyone's trust in such a serious way. But the evidence could not be ignored. Eventually, Ethan concluded that protecting the business and the innocent relatives who depended on it mattered more than avoiding conflict. He reported the theft to the proper authorities and informed the business partners about what he had discovered. He expected anger from Derek. What he did not expect was the reaction from the rest of the family. Within days, the family turned against him. His mother-in-law accused him of betraying his own relatives. His sisters-in-law claimed he should have handled the matter privately. Several family members insisted that loyalty should have come before legal action. Rumors spread quickly. Some relatives suggested Ethan had exaggerated the evidence. Others claimed he was jealous of Derek's popularity and success. Family group chats filled with criticism. Invitations to gatherings stopped arriving. Conversations became cold and distant. Even people who had once praised Ethan for his honesty suddenly questioned his motives. The pressure intensified as relatives demanded that he withdraw the complaint and apologize. Ethan refused. He remained calm, repeating the same simple truth. He had followed the evidence wherever it led. Yet every explanation seemed to make people angrier. Derek took full advantage of the situation. He presented himself as the victim of an overzealous accusation and told relatives that Ethan had always resented him. Many believed him without question. Overnight, Ethan went from being one of the most trusted members of the family to being treated like an enemy. The isolation hurt more than he expected. Still, despite the accusations, the insults, and the disappointment, Ethan chose not to fight back. He did not argue on social media. He did not expose private information. He did not try to convince people who had already made up their minds. Instead, he quietly trusted that the truth would eventually emerge. What none of them knew was that during his investigation, Ethan had discovered clues suggesting the theft was only part of a much larger secret. For now, he remained silent, allowing everyone to believe their version of events while the real story waited to reveal itself. Months passed after Ethan reported the theft, and life inside the family slowly shifted into an uncomfortable new normal. At first, the tension was unbearable. Every gathering turned into a silent battlefield where his name was avoided but clearly present in everyone's thoughts. But as time went on and no immediate consequences appeared, the family began to soften their stance. Derek, who had once been questioned, gradually reinserted himself into family life as if nothing had happened. He attended dinners again, laughed loudly at jokes, and acted like the entire accusation had been nothing more than a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. Some relatives even started to feel guilty for doubting him in the first place. They told themselves that Ethan must have misread the financial records or allowed personal bias to cloud his judgment. Slowly, the narrative began to shift, and Ethan found himself more isolated than ever. Conversations would stop when he entered the room, and people avoided making eye contact with him, as though acknowledging him would reopen a painful subject they wanted to forget. Yet beneath this surface level reconciliation, something far more serious was unfolding quietly in the background. The investigation that Ethan had initiated did not end with his report. In fact, it had only just begun. Financial auditors assigned to review the case started digging deeper into the records, and what they found extended far beyond simple missing funds. The money trail led through a complex web of transactions involving multiple accounts, false business expenses, and suspicious payments routed through third-party names that initially seemed unrelated to the family business. As analysts followed the flow of money, patterns emerged that pointed toward a carefully constructed system designed not just for theft, but for long-term financial manipulation. Derek's name kept appearing in ways that could not be dismissed as coincidence. At first, investigators believed it might be limited to unauthorized transfers, but soon, they uncovered something much more alarming. Forged documents bearing signatures of other family members, used to open credit lines and approve loans without their knowledge. Each discovery added another layer to a growing sense of betrayal that extended beyond money into personal identity and trust. While the investigation expanded quietly, Derek continued his normal routine, unaware that the walls around him were closing in. He even began speaking more openly about Ethan, framing him as someone who had tried to destroy the family out of jealousy. His confidence in controlling the narrative grew stronger as more relatives began to believe him again. Meanwhile, Ethan remained completely silent. He did not defend himself against the renewed accusations, nor did he attempt to explain the ongoing investigation. To the outside world, his silence looked like defeat or indifference, but in reality, he was cooperating closely with investigators, providing every document he had collected and answering every question with precision. He understood that any emotional reaction or public confrontation could jeopardize the process, so he chose discipline over impulse. The turning point came when financial experts traced several large transactions to shell companies registered under slightly altered business names, all linked indirectly to Derek through a chain of intermediaries. This discovery triggered a deeper forensic audit, and within weeks, authorities began to realize they were not dealing with a simple case of internal theft, but a structured financial fraud operation that may have been running for years before Ethan even noticed the first discrepancy. As evidence accumulated, investigators quietly prepared legal action, gathering enough proof to ensure there would be no escape through denial or manipulation. Still, nothing was made public yet, and the family remained unaware of the storm building beneath their assumptions. Derek, feeling increasingly untouchable, became more reckless, even expanding his influence within the family business as people slowly trusted him again. Ironically, the more confident he became, the more evidence he unknowingly exposed. Each new transaction he authorized left a digital footprint that strengthened the case against him. Ethan observed all of this from a distance, never interfering, never revealing what he knew, waiting patiently for the moment when silence would no longer protect the guilty. What the family believed was reconciliation was actually the calm before exposure. And what Derek believed was victory was actually the final stage of his downfall already in motion. The truth was no longer hiding, it was simply preparing its arrival. The final collapse began quietly without warning, in the same way most truths eventually surface after being buried too long. It started on an ordinary morning when federal investigators arrived at Derek's workplace with official warrants, their presence calm but firm, carrying folders that represented months of hidden work, finally reaching its conclusion. Employees who once admired Derek for his confidence and success were suddenly frozen in shock as agents moved through the office, securing computers, files, and financial records. Within minutes, the atmosphere shifted from routine business activity to controlled chaos. Phones rang unanswered, conversations stopped mid-sentence, and the name Derek, once spoken with respect, now carried confusion and disbelief. The investigation that Ethan had triggered was no longer silent. It was fully in motion, and the evidence it carried was overwhelming. As forensic accountants reviewed the seized documents, the full scale of the scheme was finally revealed. Derek had not only siphoned money from the family business, but had also constructed an elaborate network of fraudulent transactions designed to conceal the flow of funds over several years. Fake invoices, altered ledgers, and shell companies created under variations of legitimate business names painted a picture of deliberate, calculated deception. Even more damaging was the discovery that several family members had unknowingly been used as financial shields, their identities and signatures forged to secure loans and credit lines that they had never approved. The betrayal cut deeper than money. It struck at the very foundation of trust that held the family together. As news of the investigation spread beyond the office, it reached relatives one by one, each phone call delivering a different version of the same devastating truth. Some refused to believe it at first, clinging to the image of Derek they had known for years, but the evidence left no room for denial. Bank statements, legal documents, and official reports confirmed every accusation Ethan had once made. The same people who had labeled him a traitor now found themselves staring at proof that he had been right all along. Meanwhile, Derek attempted to maintain control of the narrative, but the pressure was no longer something he could manage. Interviews with investigators revealed inconsistencies in his explanations, and his earlier confidence began to fade as the legal consequences became unavoidable. What had once been charm and authority was now replaced with panic and fragmentation. Court proceedings followed soon after, drawing attention from both local media and the wider business community. During the hearings, evidence was presented in detail, showing not only the financial damage but also the emotional betrayal inflicted on people who had trusted him without hesitation. Witness after witness testified, and each statement added another layer of certainty to the case. The judge, after reviewing the extensive documentation, described the operation as a prolonged abuse of trust that had impacted both personal relationships and professional integrity. As the verdict approached, the family that once stood divided by belief and loyalty now stood united in regret. One by one, relatives who had condemned Ethan began to reach out, some with apologies, others with silence that spoke louder than words. At a private family gathering held months later, the atmosphere was no longer filled with anger but with reflection and remorse. Ethan arrived without expectation, without anger, and without the need for validation. When his mother-in-law finally stood up and admitted publicly that she had been wrong, the room fell into a heavy silence. Her voice broke as she acknowledged that they had chosen emotion over truth and pride over evidence. Others followed, admitting their mistakes, recognizing how easily they had been misled by appearances and personal bias. Ethan listened without interrupting, not seeking revenge through their guilt, but understanding the cost of truth when it arrives late. Derek's absence from that moment was symbolic. Everything he had built within the family had already collapsed. In the end, there was no dramatic celebration, no loud declaration of victory. Ethan's revenge had never been about destruction, it had been about revelation. The truth had done what anger never could. It exposed everything. And in that quiet aftermath, with reputations broken and trust rebuilt on honesty rather than illusion, Ethan walked away, not as a traitor, but as the only person who had seen clearly from the very beginning.